Folks, I'm One Proper Variant, and today we're here for Devdare number 67 for Victoria 3. This one is about patch 1.1, and it is the third of its kind. In the last couple of weeks, we've talked about what will be in patch 1.1. There were some things where I personally said this is really good, some things where I said I wish this was slightly different. I gotta tell you right now, this Devdare is very juicy, it is very promising, and it probably is my favorite when it comes to 1.1, because there are some changes here that just are very promising. But before we even jump into this, I would like to highlight this post right here that Wiz made. This post talks about the issue of, essentially, if you have a capitalist economy, for example, as Russia, I'm playing that in a multiplayer game in a private setting at the moment. I play Russia, and I have an incredibly regressive empire. Like, I'm being serious here. I'm trying to roleplay as the biggest, absolutist monarchy in the world. I suppress wherever I can. I'm a terrible person, and I want nobody to have money except the landlords. I actually am even... you know, towards the... I set the tariffs on grain, for example, to export, triggering the dynamic grain tax journal entry, or corn laws, I believe it is called. Anyway, I'm playing that game in this way, and yet much of my population is quite educated and quite wealthy. The reasoning for this is that if you have something that makes a lot of money, like all my grain farms, for example, because I'm exporting it, of course, many of the workers are actually getting a really good shake when it comes to, you know, their potential there as well, and that is bad. We're looking at a situation where I want to run a regressive top-down sort of empire, and the game is just so friendly to its workers that they always pay quite a bit. Now, this isn't the current issue, just the current issue, I should say, when it comes to paying people in buildings. The other issue is that since wages are fundamentally quite high, introducing a minimum wage, if you're not careful, if you don't know what you're doing, will basically lead to you outcompeting yourself in every respect. It's not a good balancing. Back in the day when we had the video, for example, in Belgium, I was of the opinion, if you introduce the welfare laws, the minimum wage laws, maybe you set the legal precedent, so the legal must-have, to a lower percentage. Right now, it's plus 50% where it starts, right? If it was at like 20% maybe, then it would be less of a massive impact that can bankrupt your entire nation in no time whatsoever. But this change that they have here, that fixes both me playing a regressive nation and the sort of workers' movements laws being somewhat useless because everybody already is fairly well paid if you have a good running economy. These are actually being addressed as per this post. Let's take a look at this. There are changes to this coming in 1.1. Buildings will only raise wages to prevent major worker radicalization or when trying to compete for labor rather than just going, we made a bigger profit, everyone gets a raise. This means if I export a good and it makes a lot of money, I have no rights when it comes to minimum wage, when it comes to old age pension. I have nothing of that stuff going on. My workers will not make a lot of money. Unless there is a huge competition for labor force, which commonly isn't the case in most countries. I think that is what the sort of automation PMs are, of course, for, right? This problem would be solved. This would fundamentally just be solved. We would be in a position where the workers are poor, the workers are angry, and you can actually suppress getting more radicals and raising the wages. I wonder how they would go about rolling back wages, right? But we're looking essentially at a situation where if you pass, for example, your home office laws and institutions, you can stop people from radicalizing because of a loss of standard of living, making it so that the employers would actually raise wages even less frequently. And I think that is a good thing. I think that the way it is organized now allows you to play much more illiberal than you already can, and this is together with a buff to playing in a liberal country, but at the same time it also allows you to play in a liberal country without actually sort of running yourself over the abyss, because minimum wages are just raising your cost of living, raising your cost of production and whatnot too high. It currently already works. I want to highlight this as well. It's not broken, it's not a bug, it's just unbalanced. Which, yeah, doesn't make it better, but I'm just saying the principle of the minimum wage and such will now stay here, but this change is actually massive. I wanted to highlight this, very, very important. I think playing countries that really care for the lower class, or just for the upper class, I should say, are very, very interesting indeed once 1.1 comes out. Very, very good change right here, and this Devdare has a bunch of good changes. Let's take a look at morale first. Happy Thursday. Today we'll talk about some more changes that we've introduced in patch 1.1, including how morale works. For starters, why rework morale? One piece of feedback we heard a lot of post-release was that it was frustrating to watch long drawn-out battles that tied up the front, while your battalions that weren't in that combat perished from attrition. Our goal with these changes is primarily to make battles snappier, ensuring that battles that are all but decided can come to a rapid conclusion, so the front can start moving again. Some nice side effects are that your supply, morale recovery rates, and having reinforcements and reserves start to play a greater role than they used to. In the new system, instead of the losers typically being the only side to take morale damage, units on both sides will take a certain amount of morale damage for each round of combat. That morale damage can be modified by various factors, such as technologies and production methods. In addition, the side that was taken the most casualties will suffer an additional multiplier to their loss of morale, ensuring that combat superiority is still what ultimately wins battles. What this currently does now is that it makes morale more important. Things that influence morale are also more important. It is, with that, indirectly a nerf to you having training rate and recovery rate and such, but I think that will still play a role. But it makes it fundamentally so that morale plays a bigger role and you will care for it much, much more. Now, is that good? Is that bad? The first thing, and I think this is the only thing that we can really establish here, is that we cannot say this. To see whether it's balanced, whether it's unbalanced, whether it's good, whether it's a disaster, you have to see the numbers in action, you have to play it, you have to have different scenarios, you need to check on these things, right? And if you can't do that, which we can't because we can't play this yet, then you can't really say this will work, this won't work. What we can judge, however, is the fundamental intention. First of all, we have the intention of saying, okay, people are frustrated because there's only one battle, it might last for like 30 days, sometimes there are bugs and it lasts for literally like a year or something, but it's like 30 days, maybe 60 days, whatever, right? Let's say 70 days is the average time. People were saying that what they would like is multiple battles per frontline so that this moves faster. What they're doing here essentially is this without adding simultaneous battles. If you have one battle that lasts for 70 days and you have instead two battles that each last for 70 days, you can also do it the other way around, where you have two battles that each last 30 days and they're subsequently. This means effectively this change, since it makes battles snappier, is as though you had multiple battles at the same time at one frontline, because battles happen more often. This is in general, I think, a good change. The circumstances that we have right now simply make it so that the attrition, and think this through, right? Attrition right now plays a massive role, and it needs to play a massive role. But since battles take such a long time, reinforcing these attritions, these attrition losses, make it much more important to have, for example, a barrack where only 20 out of 50 units are mobilized, so the training rate is incredibly high. By making it so that you have more battles where more people are directly involved, where more people need to be refilled, you are indirectly nerfing this, and I think it is a good nerf. This is the, you know, sometimes with this battle system, I gotta tell you this, even now for me, I sometimes am not sure what the intention of something is. Be that because of the UI, or be that because I look at something and it doesn't quite work right. This dev diary here, and the changes made, directly, in my brain at the very least, connect to why these changes are being made and what the blueprint, so to speak, behind this is. I really like the idea that they're basically sitting down and saying, by making battles faster and by adding another factor that currently is very undervalued, which is morale, we can make it so that factors like such, you know, that I just talked about, weigh a bit less because they're currently much, much more important, and we can reinforce other factors coming in there. This, in general, is a good change as far as the intention is concerned. I hope that the implementation is also good. This is a big question that I don't think anybody can answer except the devs, because we haven't tested this. Anyway, the basis for how much morale units lose each day is determined by the organization or ship class production method groups in barracks/conscription centers and naval bases respectively. The more modern the method of warfare, the lower the loss of morale. Makes sense, right? Morale plays a bigger role now, so your tech advantage plays into this directly. Also, conscripts now differ from regular battalions in that they suffer more morale damage. This fundamentally is a good change, I think. Relying on a conscript army is not bad. I'm so curious whether you could have a scenario where you like have a very professional army that can be held back by a massive conscript army, obviously with a very difficult time because they fundamentally have worse stats in terms of morale damage, but they might be able to defend themselves quite well because you just have that many. They're now cycling in more fresh units at a quicker pace, which makes it so that your training rate in a barrack needs to do even more work, which means it can't do that much work, and the conscripts might be able to outdo a professional army where not all units are mobilized. We have to see where this goes, but I like the fundamental thing here. I really need to see this in action, basically. But the core idea clearly is to speed up warfare and to give some factors more reason to use them and other factors less reason. The Ohioan conscripts have a relatively high base morale loss of 15 men per day, but this is reduced due to national militia. so this is a law. The morale losses increase somewhat from currently being in a battle where more casualties have been inflicted on them than they have on the enemy. When all remaining men in the unit have been lost to casualties or more a morale loss, the battalion will detach from the battle. Once fighting has concluded, their commanding general's experienced diplomat trait will increase the speed by which their morale recovers. So this is once fighting has concluded. This is important here. Yeah, very important. Morale will also recover along with fresh reinforcements from the conscription center supporting them. There you go, yep, these are indeed coming in. This still plays a role, it's meant to play a role, just not as big, I guess, as it currently does. Let's take a look at this. So, skirmish infantry gives us plus 15 straight, then minus 5% from the low national militia, then morale damage here because more losses taken, and then morale recovery. This is this one. See, I wish that this doesn't tell me that this only happens once fighting is concluded, you know what I mean? Plus 50% from commander trait doesn't really tell me this. I wish that this explained this a bit more. These tooltips are always a bit bothersome because I'm like, when is this value applied here already? Is it not applied yet? There are some things where I would like this just to be expanded upon, but the base idea clearly is to speed up battles, to use more combats via rotation, units, I mean, via rotation, and then challenge them on the technological level as well on top of this, making it so that, yes, your logistics, yes, your attrition still plays a role, but attrition much, much less now because battles just happen more often, which then directly make units basically incapable of fighting and of succeeding in fighting. Modifiers can affect how much morale your own troops lose, such as good modifiers from first aid and field hospitals, or bad modifiers from battle conditions, such as broken supply lines or commander traits like reckless. But the morale damage you take can also be modified by the enemy's forces, for example via production methods like siege artillery or chemical weapon specialists, or character traits like wrathful. You can already see this. The 1.1 changes, and keep this in mind, 1.2 is the patch that will be meant to change warfare on a core level. That is, well, not on a core level, it's the wrong phrasing here. On a more far-reaching level, I think. And yet they clearly sat down and said, we need to revamp how important and how impactful and where it can be impacted morale is. I think this is a really good change. I'm looking forward to this. I really hope that it pans out. It adds another thing to the equation and balances the others quite a bit. When battles start, units are now deprioritized to enter combat if they are injured or demoralized. Very, very good. Currently, it's not doing that, and this obviously makes it so if you have conscription troops and you have like 200, there are more battles now, there are 100 on the enemy sides, and they might be really good, really good units in that, but if they can't keep refreshing quick enough because they keep cycling in the healthy ones and then get sort of shredded there, you might actually win despite having inferior troops. What this means is that even if you end up with fewer than your full complement of battalions in a particular fight, the rest of them will make use of the short respite to recover for the next one. Speaking of recovery, we have also made a few changes to the way wage levels work. Right, let's talk about this. Higher military wages than usual now affect how quickly units recover morale when not in combat, letting flush governments push front lines by gradually overcoming the enemy's fighting spirit. At least as long as you're able and willing to rack up an enormous body count in the process. This is the biggest question that I have on this. I am not sure at this point how I feel about the wages in general and the way they impact things. I say this primarily, and they revamped this, we're going to see this in a second here. I say this primarily because if you are looking at the way the late game economy in particular works, whenever you do a war, when you do an early war, for example, in the current version, I want to highlight this, you want to be on very high military wages because this very, very likely will push you towards armed forces being at a plus 10, maybe even a 20%, which gives you 30% extra offense and defense. And that's insane. And that's just via the wages. That's all it is, right? So I'm coming from a point of view here, I think, where I think you need to be very selective on what bonuses are applied via the wage levels, because in the current version, the bonuses that are applied are insane if you really work it out, right? If you take a look at the armed forces, how they're performing, and so on and so forth. I've won so many wars against friends where it basically went, okay, hello, yes, I'm showing up and I think I'm strong, and then they look, they lose, and I say, my wages, it's my loyalty, it's the strength of my armed forces. That sort of stuff is so powerful that really balancing everything that is done here needs to be well considered. I hope this is well considered, but like changing something like unit morale recovery might make it so that it's just mandatory to set your wages to very high, right? And something being mandatory means that every other choice you can make is literally garbage. And that's not good. You want them to be somewhat viable, to work in a balanced way rather than an extremely I must do this way. Anyway, recovering morale faster than the enemy could be well worth the expense in the long run. It will also give your officers and servicemen a better standard of living, building loyalists in your armed forces over time. Their increased wealth will provide them with more clout to throw around in internal politics as well, of course, so take that into account. Yeah, that's of course, very clear. So, very high military wages. What do they do now? Plus 20% morale recovery. I hope this is balanced. I have no idea. I hope that 20% is not too extreme, not too little. The 2% or the plus 2 armed forces approval, I like this a whole lot more. The fact that in the previous versions, in the version that we are in right now, I can bring the armed forces, the petite bourgeoisie, and the intelligentsia just by moving 2 rows of button to the maximum to +5, I think it's +5, right, is insane. That is so powerful. It's crazy because every other faction, I basically need to pass laws. I need to do things they enjoy. For these, boom, you get a little bit more money. You're so damn happy. We are golden, right? These are the things that definitely need balancing. This right here looks like a much better number to me. I'm not sure about the moral recovery. Again, we don't have any of the numbers in mind here. I just hope that it's not going to be a must-have. Now, the military wages, yep, and then army power projection. I'll be honest with you, they talk quite a bit here about like how it impacts your prestige if you underpay your people. I don't think I've ever cared about that. Maybe I'm wrong here, right? But when I look at this, I've never been like, oh man, I'm only great power number 3. I really need to get some more prestige via the army power projection. I never cared for that because fundamentally, whether you will win, whether you are better than another great power, is determined by your industrial power base, by how secure your country is built, right? The idea that I really like need to go for this prestige is such a niche idea. I can't say I care for this modifier right here. This isn't the extent of the changes to government military wages in 1.1, however. These settings used to be a highly efficient way of directly and immediately altering your interest group's approval scores, which we have toned down a bit. Very nice. By making the approval changes limited to -2, -1, 0, +1, and +2 for the 5 different levels. Really good change, as I said. Of course, the act of raising or lowering wages still has the usual knock-on effects. Yep, that makes perfect sense. High or low military wages also affect your armed forces power projection, leading to a prestige impact also during peacetime. It's just like, do we care? Kind of, right? I guess like it's one of the levers you can move, but I don't think this is something that really concerns me. If anything, like, I'd like this, for example, to maybe have an impact on what sort of traits are likely for my armed forces to spawn with. If they, for example, are in a position where they say, okay, wait a minute, we're getting underpaid here, we are angry about this, let's get somebody that's like a jingoist, or maybe somebody that wants to get rid of the status quo, you know, if you're a monarchy, maybe a republican, in the hope that they can become a glorious republican army. I would like this a whole lot more, because like the prestige thing, I personally don't really care for it. You tell me whether you care about it, but I can't really say that it ever crosses my mind when playing the game, or ever would. Low military wages also affect your building's training rate. For example, how rapidly they can reinforce battalions and flotillas. They have become underpowered due to casualties. Makes perfect sense. To round it out, low government wages provide a direct impact on prestige, while higher levels now provide additional authority. Very cool. I like this a lot. Am I blind? Oh, these are government wages. Makes perfect sense. Direct impact on prestige. Sure, fine. While higher levels now provide additional authority. Very, very cool. I actually like this a lot. More authority via higher wages. Big fan. This, on the other hand, different from the prestige, is a buff that I really care about. Being a republic, and for example, if you're a republic and you want to go towards council republic and you haven't enacted autocracy yet, making it so, well, oligarchy or whatever, making it so that you barely have any authority almost makes it impossible to play command economy, because you need the authority to, you know, for example, put consumption taxes up so that you can actually do things. With this, holy moly, you can build a massive state, you can build a rich state, and then bureaucrats that might support your new dream, you know, that sort of thing. This is a great buff. My god, this government wage is all of a sudden very, very interesting. As a final note, an update from our first patch 1.1, update on legitimacy levels. This one is really good. Make sure to take care of this, or to take care of listening here. One oft-repeated concern with how legitimacy works currently is that under most democratic systems, having 2 parties in a coalition government does not provide much of a penalty, even if those parties are vehemently opposed to each other. From one perspective, this was working as intended, as it represents a trade-off between legitimacy, in this case popular representation, and ability to actually enact any new laws, since the incoherence between the ideologies and government would make debate and stall outcomes very common. Yes, but I think the benefit of the 100% legitimacy very gravely outweighed this right here. But, on the other hand, it felt wrong to have two of the completely incompatible parties working together in a highly functional government, as long as they didn't try to make any changes, that is. In response, we have changed the legitimacy penalty from government size to one that actually represents ideological incoherence. Adding a party or interest group to government will now cause any conflicting ideologies, as measured by their stances on laws, outside party boundaries to inflict a legitimacy penalty. This encourages formation of government groups that are both strong and effective together. We're very interested in hearing how this change feels to you all once patch 1.1 drops. This is the best change, from my perspective, that 1.1 is making. Listen. Who knows what other changes 1.1 is making? We're getting the changelog next week, but this is so good. Despite representing the majority of clout and votes in Great Britain, an unholy alliance between Tories and Whigs is just too incoherent to form a government together. You could still confirm such a government, but the penalties for doing so would be enormous, and no legislation could be passed while legitimacy is that poor. This is really, really good. So, there's one caveat here, and I want to take this away very much at the start, because I do think it is important, but I think it matters much, much less than what is achieved with this. The caveat is that in certain countries, in certain time periods, obviously unity governments of this sort existed. Absolutely, 100%. This is something that this system, as it is now, doesn't emulate really at all, because like it always costs legitimacy unless the parties are actually close together. But it puts you in a position where, I'm looking at this actually. I'm so eager to see this. Yeah, it basically is one of these things, right, where these governments existed, these big governments. Even Tories and Whigs, I think, existed, but on a fundamental level, this is not really addressed here. I don't think it was addressed in the earlier system either, because you would always just form a mega coalition. It didn't matter who was in it. This change right here is genuinely the best thing about this rework. This rework in itself is good, right? But this is so nice. What happens here is that as you add these parties to your government, it checks for ideology penalties. Governance principles, they disagree. Distribution of power, they disagree. Citizenship, church and state, bureaucracy, army model, internal security. They check by checking the stances of the individual interest groups within the parties, making it so that if you have 4 parties and they're all essentially like social democrat or communist, right? They're all going into this direction. You will be able to form a more legitimate government with those 4 parties than you can with 2 parties that disagree on everything. In the current system, the exact opposite is true. I had a friend, I have a friend, he's still my friend, who was playing France and everything was going down nothing was looking good. So many parties, right? But so many parties that fundamentally didn't disagree with one another. They were just saying, I want to be social democrats, I want to be the other flavor of social democrats, I want to be the light socialists, right? They should have been capable of completely working together in government, and yet they didn't, because every party counts as one additional IG, which gives you a -20 for the actual legitimacy counter in the current system. This change makes it so that those parties can govern together and not have an awful time. I do wonder whether if you have something that is really coherent, right, whether that gives you, like, positive points. Again, the balancing here, the math behind it, I have no idea, right? I don't know whether this will be good. But the core idea of what they do now here is that the player should be much more concerned, if they still want to change laws, if they want to do things, they should be much more concerned with building interest groups up to such a degree that they can be in a coherent government. They should be building interest groups up in a way that allows you then to say, I don't need to take 15 million parties into government, or I am in a position where the parties are fairly similar, right? So I can add them, they're not all too incoherent, boom, here we go. This change is a really, really good one when it comes to the intention and when it comes to what it can achieve. I'm very excited to see this in action, actually, because we're looking at something here where now you have these very distinct stages of legitimacy in government that really change whether you can pass anything, whether people are happy, whether they're unhappy. So you need to balance that, and you need to balance who can actually pass laws now, as, you know, of course, if they dislike it, they already massively outweigh one another. Now, the actual balancing of this, again, no idea, similar to morale, we have to see how it is, but this intention behind this, I am so happy that they did this. This is a really good change, that should basically debuff the sort of like two-party countries that we see a lot, and buff a bit the multiple parties where they are fairly similar. For example, where the intelligentsia and the petite bourgeoisie, if they are similar, they could be in the same party, but they happen to not be. You can still have them in the same government because, well, you know, now the coherence matters a whole lot more rather than just, hey, these are X, Y, and Z many IGs. We're going to see how this pans out, math-wise, but I love this change. This is such a good change. And this is it for this dev diary, actually. So, yeah, I was very negative, I think, or, well, I had a lot of criticism for something in the earlier dev diaries. This one, I really like the changes. I'm very much looking forward to this in particular, because it should change the dynamic of, A, how you view how rich your industry is, whether you pass workers' movements laws, whether you need to pass them or whether you do not care about it, whether you are in a position where you say, okay, here's how morale works, here is how I build my army now, here's how I interact with my wages, or whether you look at this and you say, here's how I can form a government. I am really looking forward to this. 1.1, hopefully next week or the week after, I'm not sure. The changes we have discussed in this and the previous two dev diaries represent just a fraction of the changes you will see in the new update. These ones are maybe the most visible, but a number of under-the-hood improvements and bug fixes have been made as well. Next week we will go through the full changelog. Until then, I'm looking forward to that. I'll see you then, and you tell me what you think about the changes made here. I am very excited, I gotta tell you. And for the moment, later, alligator.